It's time to build.
What's up, everybody? Chris here, Power Company Climbing. I'm in the machine shop today, my home wall, to kick off this Essential Spray home wall series. And I first want to tackle a topic that I've seen hotly debated on the online forums, and that's that if you've decided to build a home wall, especially now when everybody's building home walls while we're quarantined, do you need a kicker on your wall? And if so, how big should it be? And the answer, as usual, is it depends. It depends on what your space looks like and how big your wall is going to be. Depends on your goals as a climber. It also depends on what angle your wall is going to be, and honestly, that's a whole other video. And it depends on what you want to accomplish with your home wall. Not all of us are looking for the same things. So let's get into it. All right, one of the first things you want to think about is how the space that you're building your wall in is going to constrain your wall. And that might help you decide if you should have a kicker and whether it should be large or small. If you're constrained by height, if you've got an 8-foot, 9-foot ceiling, then maybe it might be better to keep a smaller kicker. You're going to lose some climbing space on the plane of your wall if you have a big kicker and then can only go up to an 8-foot height. Now, if you're constrained by width, like we are in the machine shop, then the size of your kicker may not matter so much. We knew that we needed 36 inches between the top of our 45 and the back wall. That's what we estimated would be fine, and it has been. It seems short, but ultimately that works out. So we could move our wall up and down, and it would still be the exact same length, the exact same amount of climbing space. So adding a 28-inch kicker, which is what we have, made a lot of sense. We could get the wall to the top of the room, and we could still have a bunch of kicker space to add tiny holds, to add moves to the bottom of the wall. All right, let's talk wall angles. I'm not going to get into that conversation of what's the best angle to build your home wall at. That's a much bigger discussion. We'll do that down the road. For now, we're going to talk about how the angle of your wall affects whether or not you should have a kicker. So if you have a lower angled wall, something like a 15 or a 20 like ours, maybe even up to 25, you might be able to get away without a kicker without any negative side to it. One of the things I would change about our setup, if I could, is I might extend the 20 a little closer to the floor. Now, we were constrained by our space here. We wanted to make sure we had room for the campus board between the top of the 20 and the campus board. But in hindsight, we could have done with a little less space. I could have extended the wall. Or maybe I even make the kick something like 10 degrees so it's still a little bit overhanging. If you're on a lower angled wall, a 10, 15, 20, then you're going to be using pretty small grips. Your goals probably tend in that direction, so it might be worth it to not have a kicker at all. However, if you're going steeper than that, there are some things to consider. All right, one of the first things you have to consider is what the bottom of your wall looks like as far as the pad depth and what you're going to be using your wall for. If you're a sport climber who's going to be doing mostly circuits on your home wall, then maybe you don't need to worry about having a lot of space because you're going to be keeping your feet on the wall all the time. But if you go without a kicker and you're close to the floor with your feet when you're starting, then the first 2 or 3 moves you may not be able to cut feet at all. And if you're training for bouldering, if you're an explosive climber, maybe you want that space. So a kicker might be helpful in that situation. Now, even if the pad depth isn't a big concern for you, we still have to think about how much room do you have for your feet, where the wall meets the floor. As you can see, I've got 2 boards set up, one at about 45, one at about 60, 2 popular steep wall angles. And if we try to put our foot in under the wall to see how much room we have, on the 45, we lose about the first 12 inches. On the 60, we lose about the first 20 inches. And that means that vertically from the floor, the 45 could use about an 8-inch kicker, and the 60 could use about a 10-inch kicker. And you're not going to be losing much of that usable space on the wall. So it might be to your benefit to have those. And then we also don't have to get in there with a drill or a wrench and try to get footholds on in this little constrained space. All right. One of the arguments I hear most often for not having a kicker on a steep wall is that if you're using it for training, then why would you want to make it easier? And to be honest, I just don't even understand the logic of this argument. There's no universal law saying that every move done on the 45-degree angle is harder than moves done at a less steep angle. It just doesn't work that way, and anyone who's been climbing for any amount of time knows that that's true. There's also no rule saying that you have to start on the kicker. We very often start with our feet off the kicker, and I think it's a good way to progress a problem from slightly easier to slightly harder. And sometimes that's not even the case. We've found that with some problems, especially if you have bad feet on the kicker, it can be considerably harder to use a bad foot down there instead of an okay foot on the steep wall. Foot placement on a kicker can also make a move much more difficult. Not to mention the ability to post on a wall that has no feet while you're climbing on a steeper wall is a really valuable skill to have. Not to mention, if you're building a 45 or a 60, it's a pretty sure bet that most of your holds are going to be pretty large. Even the hardest problems can have pretty big holds at those steep angles. So having a kicker can allow you to use some smaller holds at the starts of your problems. And if you only have one wall, maybe having a variety of sizes of holds is going to be helpful for your climbing in the long run. Further, while I'm a big fan of a single steep plane, it's not really that realistic that you're going to be climbing on that exact angle all the time outside. How we train is specific. So if you're getting better on a 45, that's going to transfer best to a 45 outside. My guess is that you're probably going to be climbing on 30s, 50s, 20s, all the angles when you get outside. So you really have to ask yourself, if the training argument is one that you're really paying attention to, what is it that you're training for? Are you training to be better on your 45, or are you training to be better at rock climbing? All right, let's talk about size. You've decided you need a kicker. How big should it be? What's the maximum? What's the minimum? So I've already mentioned that ours are pretty big because we're constrained by the depth of our space. The kicker on our 45 is 28 inches tall. That's pretty big, but it allows me to sit start comfortably, and it's not so high that I can't get my feet up above the kicker to start without the kicker in play. The kick on our 20-degree wall is 24 inches tall, and like I said, I'd probably go a little smaller than that. Now, if I were to go the smallest that it could be, we use holds that are about 6 inches off the floor pretty regularly. But at that height, your heel is only an inch or two off the floor, tops, if you're dropping your heel a little bit. So I don't think I'd go below 6 inches for a kicker. You're just not going to have room. And again, consider your space constraints for a steep wall. If you're going to be 45 degrees, about 8 inches is about right. And if you're going to be on a 60, about 10 inches. So you might want to play around with that and try and determine what's going to be the smallest that you can go. If you have a bunch of space and you can go high, take into consideration how awkward it's going to be to get your feet above the kicker to start when you're sit starting, because I do think it really is valuable to have sit starts in play that don't involve the kicker. Couple of side notes. If your kicker is going to be directly on top of your drywall or whatever your wall substrate is, you're gonna need much shorter bolts, or you're gonna need to turn your holds into screw-ons if they're bolt-on holds. I would recommend saving your T-nuts entirely, using plywood with no T-nut holes for your kicker, and just going with screw-on feet. You're also gonna wanna get some really, really bad feet, and those are hard to find. I would look for the no shadow type of feet that are very slopey, smeary type feet, or really tiny, precise edges like our diodes or our inductors. Our resistors are great if you're limestone, granite, slippery smear type of climber and you're hoping to train for that in your gym. So be on the lookout for really, really bad feet. Pick them up whenever you can. If you do use plywood that has bolt holes can be really great tiny feet in a pinch. All right, thanks for watching, you guys. Subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, spread it around. We've got a lot more conversations to come. I hope this one was helpful. See you guys.
It's time to build.